And like always, I think the system is quite clear. Of course, thank you very much, Andrea, for being part of the symposium. Always a pleasure listening to you, and I'm really looking forward to this. And of course, you have to introduce yourself and take it from there. You know the routine, so I don't have to tell you.
I know the routine. Firstly, Vikram, I want to say thank you for inviting me. I feel very privileged to be invited as a speaker. I'm sure there's people maybe with a lot more experience than I have. So it is quite a privilege. And I do admire the work and the effort you're putting into bringing mediation more into the forefront in the minds of people, not just in your own country, but all over the world. So I think as a mediator, you know, that's a thank you from me, and thank you for the difference it will make to other people. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself. My name is, as Vikram said, Andrea O'Neill. I'm from Ireland. I live in a place called Meath, which is on the east coast of Ireland. And I live in a small village called Dunboyne. Now, maybe it might be small to some people, but for me, it is a small village. And there's about 7,000 people live there, thereabouts. So that's me. I'm also I'm a mediator and a conflict coach. On a personal level, I'm a wife and I'm a mother, and I have 2 adult children and 1 teenage daughter. I suppose I've spent most of my life mediating within kind of my own family circles and that, but really to get into the kind of process of mediation is only in the last 4 or 5 years. So, but what I found was that when I started to learn about conflict and understand conflict and the process of mediation, to me, it was transformational. And to me, it was something that needed to be shared, and it needs to be something that people needed to know about. It needs to become part of our culture and the way that we were in our being, as opposed to just something that you went off to university to learn, but that was actually became part of our being and something that we shared with those around us. And it's something that I feel quite passionately about, as you know, Vikram. So, sorry now, I just move to the next slide here. Okay, so a little bit today we're going to talk about mediation in our culture and traditions. So I'm saying here an Irish perspective, but it's probably more my Irish perspective. I'm sure there's other Irish mediators out there might take a different perspective on it. So it's my Irish perspective on mediation in our culture and traditions. So where are we and what are we about? So a few quick little facts. We're an island nation. We're on the westernmost edge of Europe. Our official name is Éire, or Ireland, Éire being the Celtic or Irish name for it. Our form of government is a constitutional democracy. In the island of Ireland, there are 32 counties. 26 of them are what is known as the Republic of Ireland, and 6 of those counties are in what's known as Northern Ireland. And I suppose, so I would be on the south of Ireland. I live in the Republic of Ireland, the capital of which is Dublin, and the capital of Northern Ireland would be considered Belfast. Our population as of April 2021 was 5.1 million. Now, this is quite interesting because if we go back to, say, 1845, the time of the famine, you go back into Irish history, we would have had a population of about 9 million people. But with famine and with economic downturns and everything else and emigration, we've lost a lot of our population. In recent years, that's changed because we've now become a country that has immigration into it. So for the first time since the 1851 census, we have reached over 5 million people. Our currency is euro, and our official language, Irish is our official first language, with English as our second language. However, just to kind of make it clear, most people in Ireland would speak English as their first language. However, Irish is taught in all our schools, and there are some of our schools that teach all their subjects purely through Irish. And we have 7 counties within our 32 counties that would be considered Gaeltacht areas, or areas where only Irish is spoken within the community. So what are we known for? I suppose really, when people think of Ireland, they tend to conjure up images of lush green fields and beautiful scenery. And it is. I mean, it's our temperate climate. We have the most beautiful scenery around. And I would encourage anybody out there that's listening in, if they can at some stage, to take a trip to Ireland and just view it for its beautiful scenery. Our people and our culture, I suppose, we're known for the crack agus ceol, which is the Irish for the chat and the song. So we love the social element of life. We're also known as great storytellers. And that comes back from in the 5th century, the Celts would have been here in Ireland, and they didn't write down their histories or the stories. They went around through the different communities, relaying kind of what was happening and what was going on. I suppose the news of the day as such. And they were known as Shanki, which were basically storytellers. And I suppose in some way that tradition has stayed with us. It's part of our DNA. We're storytellers. But I feel that if we are a nation of storytellers, there has to be good listeners to listen to the stories. So we're also a nation of listeners. And I suppose that is important when we think of mediation, when the element of the story within the mediation process is so important. And that is something that is very dear to our hearts as a culture. So some of our famous writers would be the likes of Yeats, Kavanagh, Oscar Wilde, Heaney. Actually, I have a little piece from Heaney for you, and Beckett. And there's loads more. And I mean, again, as I said, we're a nation of storytellers, poets, writers. So if anybody wants to look a little bit more, they'll get loads on Google. For most of our history, our economy was based on farming and agriculture. That kind of changed in around the 1950s, where the government's trying to encourage foreign investment into the country and encourage more kind of urbanization. So really that continued and grew until such a stage, I suppose, in the 1990s, where we earned the nickname, I suppose, the Celtic Tiger. And I suppose another thing that we're known for, which might be something that people might be reluctant to speak about, but for me, conflict is something that always offers new beginnings. So I don't think conflicts within a nation should necessarily be hidden. So one of the things is what's known as the Troubles. So the Troubles, as they're referred to here in Ireland, are a 30-year, I suppose, for want of a better terminology, civil war as such, that went on between nationalists and unionists in Northern Ireland. And people say like it was a 30-year, but actually it had centuries of history behind it. But the Troubles refer to a period, say, from 1968 to 1998. And it's important to mention that because it plays a big role in mediation in this country. Sorry now. So it might be a strange topic to bring up when we're talking about mediation, but I honestly don't think you can talk about Irish and its culture and its traditions without talking about the Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church had a huge hold on moral guidance in this country. It was responsible for our healthcare institutions. It was responsible for our education. And it also had, when the Constitution was being drawn up in 1937, although the Constitution recognised freedom of all religions, it placed a special position of the Catholic Church within the Irish society. So really, for Irish people and for our culture, the church had a huge influence on how we behaved, how we voted, how we were educated, and even how we were looked after as regards our healthcare, because it was all based on a level of morality that was seen as right by the Catholic Church as such. It is important to remember that, like, Irish society has become much more diverse and secular, but I'm just trying to give a background to where we're kind of coming from and what it has meant for us in terms of mediation. I mean, for many years, the local priest or the local clergy would have been seen as the learned of the community. And they would have been the people that would have intervened if there was a problem within families or a problem between, within the community. But unfortunately, I suppose while some of them did great work as regards kind of mediating, and that wasn't their title wasn't mediators, they didn't always come from a non-judgmental point of view. So just to keep that in mind. So this is an extract. I told you we're a nation of great storytellers, Vikram, and I know you're not a great fan for reading, so I thought I might recite a bit of poetry to you. So this is an extract from a poet called Seamus Heaney. And Seamus won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1995 for works of lyrical beauty and ethical depth, which exalt everyday miracles and the living past. Isn't that a lovely title to carry with you to your grave? But this is actually an extract. It's not a poem. It's actually an extract from a play that he wrote. But I think it kind of symbolizes what mediation might offer for us. So if you just bear with me, I know this is probably a little unusual, Vikram, and I'll just read the poem for you in the essence of us being the Irish and storytellers. Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and they get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured. The innocent in jails beat on their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard dumb. The police widow unveils faints at the funeral home. History says don't hope on the side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. Call miracles self-healing, the utter self-revealing. Double take of feeling. If there's a fire in the mountain or lightning and storm and a God speaks from the sky, that means someone is hearing the outcry and the birth cry of new life at its term. It means once in a lifetime that justice can rise up and hope and history rhymes. So I suppose the reason this poem or this writing the extract from the play was important to me is that I hope that in the work that we're doing, that we're actually going to leave a better history behind us, and also that we give the hope for a better future for our generations that follow. And interestingly enough, which I didn't realize when I picked this extract, was that it was used by President Clinton when the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998 here, and I have a bit more on that for you later on. And it was also used by Joe Biden in his inauguration speech. I think he used that justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So that was just purely coincidental. So I follow in the footsteps of great men, as they say. So now looking, so we've kind of looked at the culture and everything else. So now I want to look at what the role of mediation has been and can be in Irish society. So we've looked at the brief history and the culture. I'm going to look at the role mediation has played in the political area of things, look at mediation in regards family and family disputes, look at mediation in the workplace, and then take a quick look at our Mediation Act 2017 and then what we have going forward. So mediation in the political arena, I've already spoke to you about the Troubles that were the 30 years of conflict between national and unionists. That conflict led to 3,722 deaths, which was an average of 10 killings every month over 30 years. There was 45,000 people wounded, 15,300 bombs, 36,000 shootings, and 100 billion plus estimated financial costs. So when it came to, I suppose, find a resolution for what was going on here, I mean, talks had been going on from, this started in around 1968, talks had been going on from the early 70s between the English and the Irish governments to try and broker some sort of peace deal. But it for various reasons, they kept failing. And In 1996, George Mitchell was appointed by Bill Clinton as a special advisor to Northern Ireland. And he was invited by the Irish and British government to chair talks. And by chairing, I mean kind of mediating the talks. So not only was the time ripe, but it was also, you know, people were fed up. They were tired. They were grieving. They'd lost families. They were suffering trauma, and they needed a difference. They needed a change, and the world was changing. You know, you'd cultures coming in from all over the world, and that was making a difference to the environment that they were living in. So really the time was right. So George Mitchell was appointed as the mediator. So it's probably one of the best, I suppose, case studies of successful mediation that we can look at. Now, I'm not a politician. I don't pretend to have great political insight. So really what I'm giving you is kind of an outskirts of it, but I've put loads of links into the slides. So if anybody wants to find out any more information, they can. And we've some great mediators, Vikram, in this country who are involved in these processes. And they would be very interesting for you to have a chat with. So what was the Good Friday Agreement or the Belfast Agreement? Well, this was a multi-party agreement that came about from 2 years of talks between the British government and the Irish government and the political parties in Northern Ireland. It was signed on the 10th of April, 1998, which was actually Good Friday. So it was originally the Belfast Agreement, but it earned kind of the nickname, the Good Friday Agreement, because of the day that was signed. So it basically sets out, you know, the support and the kind of structures of the way that the governments are going to move forward. There was 3 strands set out. So first of all, the first strand was the democratic institutes within Northern Ireland, the North-South institutions, and the British-Irish institutions. So basically how they were all going to communicate with each other. So it was set up guidelines how these communications were going to go forward, how they were going to work together. So it deals with such issues as human rights, policing, decommissioning of weapons, and the release of prisoners. Because there was a lot of, as you can imagine, over 30 years, there was a lot of political prisoners in that. So the Good Friday Agreement was approved by referendums on both sides of the border, North and South, on the 22nd of May, 1998. And there was an overall majority on both sides. What's interesting about this Good Friday Agreement is as well, Vikram, is that it wasn't just a top-down approach, it was also a bottom-up approach. So while you had the likes of George Mitchell and the English and the Irish governments, and you'd some fabulous politicians from Northern Ireland working together to come to agreement. On the ground level, there was also community mediators working with the people on the ground and figuring what they want, working with the different paramilitary organisations as well. And I think that's what made it a success. It wasn't just coming down and being told what to do, it was getting all the stakeholders as such to the table. So within that, again, we come back to the church. So some of the mediators around that time would have been clergy, both Protestant and Catholic clergy. And while they might have been acting with kind of the full backing as such for the church as a representation of the church, they put themselves out there into their communities to talk to these paramilitaries, see what they needed to move forward. And they went back and forward until they actually found, so they did their shuttle mediation. So there was shuttle mediation going on the ground levels. And then that was being filtered up to the top to say what was going to work, what was going to be acceptable to the, it was filtered up to the parties further up. Now, I'm sure that people will give you people more experienced than me in the political arena will give you a much more, I suppose, political explanation what happened, but I'm just giving it from the point of view as a mediator as such. So again, I've added a link there for anybody that wants any more information on that, because it is fascinating. So this is the dialogue workshop. So this is a bit like what I was talking about earlier on, the bottom down. And actually, there's a great paper, and I've actually linked it there, and it's wrote by Jeffrey Gorey, who is a mediator. And I think I actually said he's somebody you should talk to on another conversation we had. And he was involved in political dialogue workshops. And it was about deepening the peace process in Northern Ireland. So it was actually addressing, so after this agreement had been reached, the hurt had to be addressed, the harm had to be addressed, and the trauma had to be addressed. So himself, along with many other mediators, worked together in a centre called Glencree, which is in around the Wicklow Mountains. And the people came from different sides of the conflict to actually try and build a future together by addressing the hurt and building a sense of respect and an understanding of each other's values. Now, I do have a video to actually show you, but if we've time, I'll do it at the end, Vikram. So we'll move away from the political end of things and look at the Family Mediation Service. So the Family Mediation Service in Ireland is a free service, and it was established in 1986. It's funded by the government, and it was established in 1986. Now, it was slightly different to other mediation services, family mediation services that were set up in Europe, in that it was an all issues model. So it didn't just look at family to mediate, just say for parenting issues, or it didn't just say look at finance issues. What it did was it's like a 6-stage approach where there would be the intake meeting, and then there would be the joint meeting, and then they would discuss finances, they discuss assets, they discussed parenting plan. So everything was discussed. So it was an all issues model. It was based on John Heinz's all issues model. Now, where his was kind of more forward focus, and they didn't look at the past. This is much more facilitative, where, you know, things would be addressed, emotional issues would be addressed. There's also family mediators like myself who work in the private sector, and we would be registered. Now, there's a couple of different registry bodies. I'm registered under the MII, and I would have had to carry out I would have had to have certain amount of training in separating couples. So you're not allowed to mediate separating couples unless you have a specific training for dealing with separating couples. And there's also training available, although it's not specifically necessary, for dealing with elder mediation. And then I'm guided under the code and ethics of the MII. So I suppose really family mediation is something that's been here since 1986. It's interesting, divorce didn't come into this country until 1995. And but the mediation service was there to aid kind of separating couples to come to some sort of agreement. And since our Mediation Act, there's been more, and you know, court cases and separating through the court system is expensive. So people are tending now to look at mediation, but it is slow. It is slow to get people to understand that mediation is a better way, and to understand exactly what mediation is, and really to promote it out there for family mediation. So in 2019, the Family Mediation Services had a total of 2,611 new couples to attend for family mediation. Now, remember, this is outside the private sector. This is within the government mediation service under the Legal Aid Board. Of those 2,611 cases, 1,212 of those mediate agreements were reached, so reached full agreement. There's 16 family mediation offices around Ireland, dotted around Ireland, and there's one full-time course-based one in the district family court in Dublin, which is called Dolphin's House. So I move on to, I know we've a lot to cover in this, so I'm moving on to workplace mediation in Ireland. And if you look at this quadrant here, again, I've included a link for anybody that wants to look at the research behind workplace mediation in Ireland. As you can see from this quadrant, it can be broken down into, 4 different areas. So we've the Workplace Relations Commission that deals with mediation to do with workplace issues. And I'll actually talk to you a bit more about that now in a few minutes. Then you have the public sector and the private sector with their own internal mediation systems. So you've the likes of, some of the semi-state bodies that would have their own internal systems there. So they would have their own processes, and really would only go outside if the internal system wasn't working, or if somebody had an issue with going through the internal process. And then we have companies, private companies that work specifically with corporations and industries and workplace mediations. And then we have the professional bodies. Oh, sorry, Vikram, I went back. The professional body, the Mediators Institute of Ireland, and they would have a list of private mediators who deal with workplace mediations. So just to look where mediation came into, where it's recognised in statute, I suppose, within kind of the workplace. And that comes from the Workplace Relations Act in 2015, provided the legal framework for structural reform. So that established the Workplace Relations Commission. So this is now the first port of call if an employee or an employer has an issue with some sort of workplace dispute. And the two-tier structure. So if they go in with their workplace dispute and it's either mediated on, adjudicated on, they have a right to appeal that to the Labour Court for Appeals. So the WRC deals with rights and disputes of interest. It promotes the improvement and maintenance of good workplace relationships. So any employee can ring the WRC and ask for information, be it on their holiday rights, be it on their sick pay rights, be it on their employee contract. And it wants to promote early dispute resolution through mediation. Now, interestingly enough, the WRC does mediations via phone. So I don't know, I probably have a little bit of an issue with that. I don't know how you can mediate on the phone. Maybe you can, but they obviously can because they've done it and seem to have done it quite successfully. But they do carry a certain amount of mediations out on the phone. So in 2020, there was 1,609 complaints in total advanced through the mediation process. 582 of those went to full mediation. 85% of those were done via telephone. 14% were face-to-face, and the remainder were virtually. Now, the reason the remainder were virtually was because the pandemic had hit. So they moved from face-to-face to online. So that's where that 14% comes from. And again, I've put a link in for anybody that wants to know more about that. So again, the WRC was established as a result of this Workplace Relations Act in 2015. And in section 39, it sets out the voluntary process of mediation. It also says that mediation can't be convened for the purpose of resolving a dispute quickly. And I suppose as the first protocol for resolving disputes. The agreement is binding. And in the absence of agreement, the Director General can refer it to adjudication. And again, the confidentiality of it, that it can't be disclosed to the court. So just kind of to give it an overview, I suppose, of workplace conflict in Ireland, there was a research study carried out in 2015. Again, I've linked it here for you. And it had found that there has been a decline in collective conflict. So I suppose conflicts from groups within trade unions. But at the same time, there has been a rise in individual conflicts. So relationally between people within organizations. And it found that the use of mediators was the most important innovation in the management of individual conflict. And, you know, for me, that's a message that needs to be got out there to workplaces that, you know, if this research found that mediators is the most important innovation, well, that's what we should be using. That's what we should be encouraging. You know, instead of going down these disciplinary processes, and while they have their place and they are important, well, maybe we need to look at this first. And that's something that we have to try and kind of put out there into society, into our workplace culture. There is an increase of supply and trained mediators. It's definitely, you know, it's building up. People are becoming more aware of what mediation is, and people want to be mediators. People want to find out about it. People want to use it because generally once people realize, say, the power, and maybe power is the wrong word, I suppose, the shift that mediation can bring. It's, you know, they want to be part of it because it is so powerful, and it is such a, you know, it's a paradigm shift in thinking. It really is moving from one adversarial kind of authoritarian, you know, legality kind of way, working down the legal way, to a completely different approach where we're actually having dialogues, we're talking, we're doing what we do best as human beings, we're connecting. So it is important to actually encourage that. And mediation was seen to bring positive results for both employers and employees. So what's interesting, when I was doing a bit of research for this presentation, if you Google the history of mediation in Ireland, this is probably the first thing that comes up, the Mediation Act 2017, which, when you look back at what I've kind of brought you through, and, you know, what we've experienced as mediation in this country, be it in our political spheres, family, and in our workplaces, and there's commercial as well, which I haven't even touched on. To say that this is the first thing that pops up is strange. You know, when we've had our family mediation services since 1986, when we've had one of the biggest, I suppose, mediated agreements, probably globally, really, that has been used as a template for other peace talks, and yet it doesn't come up. So is that maybe mediation needs to, is the word mediation maybe not packaged in it, that people are looking for that way? So I just thought maybe that was a point of interest. So the Act was to facilitate the settlement of disputes by mediation, to specify the principles applicable to mediation, specify the arrangements for mediation, and also what the civil proceedings would be, and to provide a practice in which mediators should describe to, or may describe to, so to have code of ethics, and to have a body or a council that would actually, you know, regulate those codes of ethics. So the Act itself is divided into 6 parts. So the first part is, it tells us what mediation is. So it tells us that mediation is confidential. It tells us that it's a facilitative process, and it tells us that it's voluntary. And it tells us what the mediator means. So it's a mediator appointed underneath the Agreement to Mediate. Now, it's interesting that the Act actually doesn't come into place until the Agreement to Mediate is signed. So the pre-mediation or our intake meetings are not taken into consideration. The Act actually begins when the Agreement to Mediate is signed. So part 2 looked at mediation in general. So it dealt with mediation. So again, as I said, it said mediation was voluntary. It also said that it must be timely. So if you're mediating a case, you must do it in a timely manner, that you can't extend. If you're working with 2 parties, you can't extend it to 10 sessions if it could have been done in 6 sessions. So it's just the timely manner of it. Another interesting thing is that if a mediator, so in mediation, we all know that we all have the opportunity to step away from it, even as a mediator, for whatever reason. The Act states that if a mediator decides to step away from mediation and ends mediation, that they must provide a letter in writing and they must return fees. And the other thing then, of course, that it covers is the self-determination. So a mediation must be self-determined. But it does, another thing, interesting thing about it is, although it mentions self-determination, there is a but if the parties invite the mediator to give advice, that's acceptable. Now, I would imagine, I mean, it's a fairly new Act, I would imagine you'd want to have that in writing, that they had invited you to actually give advice. So the Agreement to Mediate at the start of the process, so that should include things like how the mediation is going to be conducted, what your fees are, what the place is, what the time is, about the confidentiality of it, and the legal element of it, that they should be advised to get legal advice before they sign any agreement. So then we're looking at the role of the mediator. The Act covers what their qualifications should be, and we also are required to give so when I go in to do a mediation, I provide my practicing certificate to the parties that I'm going to mediate. And we have to let them know what our training is, our CPD, that we've done our CPD hours. And also if there's any conflict of interest, we have to state it as well. So the code of practice we're actually still waiting on. So there is part of the Act requires an establishment of a council. And the idea is that the council will have, I think, approximately 11 people sitting on it. And the idea is that there will be five of those people on the council will be those that are promoting mediation and coming from the mediation background. So it will probably be the likes of the registry bodies and things like that. And then the other 6 people that will be on the council will be people that have the public interest at heart. So they might be from, government directors or people that are on boards as regards kind of what's right for the public in general. And the enforceability then of mediation settlements. Confidentiality. There is exceptions to confidentiality. And that would be, say, where there is, a crime has been committed, or where there's harm to a child, or there's harm to somebody else. And we are required to report them if that is the case. So a mediated agreement is fully enforceable unless, again, there's a but. In the case of family mediations, where full disclosure of assets have not been disclosed, and the rights and the entitlements of the other party have been undermined in some way. Okay. Now, Part 3 sets up the obligations for practicing solicitors and barristers. Really, the main part of this is that they have to tell clients. So when clients come in to take a legal action and they're in dispute with another party for one reason, be it workplace, be it family, be it commercial, the solicitor is obliged to inform them about mediation. But not only inform them about mediation, they have to give them a list of numbers and contacts of mediators that they can use. They also have to inform them about the benefits of mediation. And at the end of that, they have to sign a statutory declaration to say that they have done all those things. So really what it is, it's moving disputes away from the court system so that they need to try. The idea is that they try mediation first before they go into the court systems. So Part 4 of the Mediation Act looks at the role of the court in the mediation. So during a court, if something's gone into court, the judge can invite the parties to consider mediation. So he can stop the proceedings and allow the parties to go into mediation and see can they resolve their dispute that way. If that is the case, the mediator has to give a report to the court, and just to say that mediation has happened on such a date, agreement has been met or agreement hasn't been met. Now, the effect of this is that there is the mediation on the limitation. So you know how there's a time limitation on certain things. Well, if the court has directed mediation, that time limitation stops. And it stops for approximately until the agreement, mediation agreement has been reached, or 30 days. And the fees and the costs, this is an interesting one as well. If parties refuse to go to mediation, the judge at the time can decide on awarding costs to the other party if there has been unreasonable refusal to go to mediation. So Part 5 then is about sessions, mediation and information sessions. That's still in the pipeline. That still hasn't kind of come to fruition as such yet. And Part 6 of the Act, which is the last part, is the amendment of other acts. So how this has affected other acts. Sorry. Now, so in a nutshell, the Act encourages disputants to step away from the courtroom and to kind of give mediation a go as such, to try mediation before they come into court. The Act gives clear definition of what the mediator is, what mediation is, what voluntary is, what confidentiality means, and it also says that it should be facilitative. And a point I already made is that the mediation begins when the agreement to mediate has been signed. So best practice. So we have what's here called the Legal Aid Board, and they are, I suppose, the governing body over which the Family Mediation Service comes under. So they have given best practice kind of guidelines for mediators in relation to the 2017 Acts. So one of these things is that if we sign an agreement to mediate or a mediated agreement, if we don't specifically say that it's not legally binding, well, then it is legally binding. So it's taken for granted that the agreement, the mediated agreement, is legally binding unless otherwise stated. So the advice from them is that we need to state that it is not legally binding until they've gone to their solicitors and it has been, gone through the process as such. Just see. Okay, that's just to do with the Children's Act and, the looking after kind of kids in the whole process, and to make sure the rights of the child come before everything. So this is again about the not legally binding that I spoke about there. And mediation settlements or notes of understanding should not be legally binding, again, until they are incorporated into a legally binding separation or other agreement. The Mediation Act 2017 states that the intention that the agreement are not to be legally binding must be expressly stated. So that's generally what I've just said there. Okay, so what have the benefits of this act been? They can achieve a better outcome for parties. It can reduce cost, because we know once kind of it goes into court, it can just go on and on and on. And nobody really, well, I mean, sometimes we get to the root of the problem, sometimes we don't get to the root of the problem. So the conflict continues, that cyclical process just keeps going on. And so it can be costly for those that are caught up into it. It also eases the strain on the court system. Like the court system is overworked, as is in, I suppose, most jurisdictions. So anything that can kind of ease that is welcomed by all, I suppose. It also, the other benefit of the Act is it clearly defines the role of the mediator and what is expected of the mediator and I suppose when the council is set up, it will give us clear guidelines and code of ethics. At the moment, I'm a member of the MII, a registry body here in Ireland, and I'm governed by their codes and ethics. But there's other mediators that might belong to a different registry body, and their code of ethics might be slightly different. So it'll be good to actually encapsulate it into one group or one, where there's a representation of each registry body on it. And so that we're all kind of, singing off the same page, as they say. So going forward, what the Act does, it demands, I suppose, a new kind of justice system with mediation at its heart. And I really think, Vikram, this is about changing our culture. I know this is about culture and traditions, but really for mediation to be accepted as the first port of call, we need to change the culture around conflict. We need to change the thinking of, you're right, I'm wrong. It's a win-lose situation. And we need to change that mindset, and that comes from education and, loads of, and education, not just at our level, but education from the kids right up to the adults, right up, to our governments and everywhere. So it's about bringing that education into our cultures all over the world. So the other thing about this Act is that it will allow for dialogue between the professionals, clarifying roles and respecting boundaries. Funny, I was looking back at Michael's chat with you yesterday, and he was talking about how in Florida, he was saying that there was this, or in America, this thing to be part of for the legal profession to accept them as mediators in some way. And, there's a danger of that here as well. And you can see it creeping in that, mediators were generally outside the legal profession. And now what's happening is there's an awful lot of the legal profession, since it's come under the Act, who are training as mediators. And there's this little bit divide where there's a different style of mediation. And not all, but difference, but there is, it can be noticed. And so it was interesting to listen to Michael last night and say, God, we really should learn from what he's telling us, because he is that bit further ahead than we are here. So the talks are underway to establish the Mediation Council, but that's still, I suppose, a bit up in the air. I know there's a lot of talks and a lot of work going on in the background, but it hasn't been formed as of yet. So mediation is starting to move into the mainstream. A lot of work has been done to encourage greater uptake, and there's probably a lot more work that can be done, but look, we're getting there, we're moving in the right direction, and it's all about, spreading the good news, as they say. So I was speaking to you earlier on about the MII, that is the registry body I belong to. It was founded in 1982, and it provides training for mediators. It provides a code of ethics. It also provides, a panel for us, practicing in the private mediation field, that people can kind of go, okay, so I need a mediator. Where do I go? Go to the MII website, and they go onto that website and they will see profiles of mediators like me and other people working in various different areas of mediation. And they know by going to that website, well, they have a certain standard of training, they have a certain standard of experience, and that they're guided by the code and ethics of this organization. And on top of that, it provides support systems for us mediators. There's many kind of share and learn groups. And it's something that, as a mediator, as part of our registration on a yearly basis, that we have to be part of a share and learn group. So we're continuing learning. We're continuing that student who's continuing to grow as a mediator. And we look at Michael's Lang, novice to artist. And really, this is what the MII does. It encourages us to continue learn and to grow in our experience and our knowledge around mediation, and not to be afraid to lean on those with better experience. So to actually go back and say, okay, this is where I'm at. What else should I do? Or this is where I'm at. And for somebody to help you even think it out, to ask you the right questions so you can figure out what the next best step is in, say, maybe the mediation. So by doing that, it means that when parties come to us, they are getting the best mediators. They are getting the best of who we are, because we're constantly working on ourselves to be better mediators. And not just in the practice of it, but also in the theory of mediation. So in this week, I actually contacted the MII for the purpose of this talk today, just to get a few stats. So to date, I had 674 members. They're in private practice and public service. So in the public service, we would have the likes of the Irish Prison Services, which have mediators, internal mediators, the Family Mediation Service that we spoke about earlier on, the legal services, civil and public service mediation, and the traveller mediation service. And I actually will talk a little bit about the traveller mediation service, just because we're talking about culture and how important it is in mediation. And so we'll have a little chat about that now in a few minutes. So the objectives of the MMI is to lead mediation profession nationally. So it works on a national basis. And again, to support the provision of the best possible professional mediation services. So that's, again, like what I said about the training, CPD hours, being able to touch base with more experienced mediators in our share and learn group to help us develop and improve our practice all the time, and to maintain our standards, and also to make sure that we're in line with the Mediation Act, as it is relatively new. So it's 2017. It was actually signed off on the 1st of January 2018. And so, we're at 2021. We've had nearly the best part of 2 years of a pandemic. So it really is in its early stages. So they do work to help us kind of understand what this act is and what it means for us as mediators. So having looked at those, how else is mediation being used in Ireland? In recent times, it's been used in medical disputes. So we had what was known as the cervical smear scandal over the last 2 years. And it was, what happened was there was a certain amount of, I don't have all the facts and figures for you, But generally, women would have a cervical smear done every 2 years here in this country, and then it's sent off to be tested, and it will come back and let them know if they need to kind of go and get further treatment or if everything is clear, and so forth. But what happened was people received results saying that they were actually okay, and there was no traces of cancer, no cancer cell, no precancerous cells, and that went on. And then these women, a couple of years later, were confirmed to have cancer, and maybe in the last stages of cancer. And some women have died as a result. So a mediation has been offered to, I suppose, the victims of this scandal to talk with the health boards and to talk with the government and to try, I suppose, and move in some way. It's not a dispute that can be solved, because you can't solve your health issues, but it's to try and address, I suppose, the wrong that was done, and to provide that space for a dialogue between the victims of the scandal and the health boards and the governments here in the country. I've actually put a link on that for anybody that wants to have a look at it. It's also, mediation is being used in minority groups. And so I've picked the Traveller Mediation Service here. So the travellers in Ireland are a minority group, probably make up about 6% of the population. They were originally nomadic. Some still travel, but some of them are settled within communities. But they would still, their culture, their values, their belief system still belong to the traveller culture and still identify as travellers. So this service was set up. Actually, there's a colleague of mine. I'll just move forward to this one, tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll move back. A colleague of mine, Chris McDonough, and another one, Frank Kavanagh, are involved in the Travellers Mediation Services, and they do brilliant work, absolutely fabulous work. And they worked initially, they were based in Athlone, but they're nationwide now, and they work with travellers all over Ireland. And they deal with, families affected by conflict. They deal with the prison services. They deal with education, local authorities, primary healthcare projects. And the interesting thing is, when I was talking to Chris about the traveller culture, and I was asking him, was there mediation within their culture? And what was that mediation? And he said to me, they had what was called fair play men. So these fair play men, if there were two traveller families in dispute, what happened was they decided on a fair play man who came from a different traveller family. And he would come and he would do like shuttle mediation first until it was ready to get the travellers together, the two traveller families together, to talk and reach agreement. And the idea behind the fair play man was that each family walked away with a feeling of respect and fair play. So they very much have had mediation within their culture, but it wasn't called mediation. It came by a different name. And I mean, I suppose a bit like I was talking earlier on about the influence the clergy had on families and within the times of the Troubles in kind of mediating between families, mediating between political groups and paramilitary groups. They weren't called mediators, but really what they were doing was mediation. So I think it's important to realize that we have to acknowledge kind of different cultures and how mediation can bring cultures together within our society. And our cultures are all becoming so much more diverse. I mean, in Ireland here alone, we were a country known for emigrating. We're all over the world. You'll find somebody with Irish heritage probably in every corner of the world. And now we've become a nation where we have immigration coming in. And it's created a much more diverse society, a much richer culture. But we have to acknowledge that for cultures to interact and come together, there's going to be differences, and there's going to be conflict, and there's going to be different values and things. And as mediators, we have to be ready to recognize these different cultures, and we have to try and help open up the dialogue so that these cultures can talk to each other. So this is, I suppose, one of the steps in that direction. But it's only, as I said, an example, but it's a very good example. The two colleagues I talked about are two great mediators. And then in the education system, this is, I suppose, something that is very dear to my heart that I'm trying to work on tirelessly to do. Some schools already have peer mediation within their school systems. But a few years ago, I don't know whether you know Robert Fisk. He was a journalist who he wrote many books and articles on conflict all over the world. And I went to see him on it, giving a talk. He's passed away since. But I went to a talk he was giving here in Dublin. And somebody in the audience said to him, you know, the way you speak about conflict in the Far East is that there's no hope. And his answer, which has kind of stuck with me, was that, well, there is no hope. And the person in the audience was very disappointed by this and said, well, what do you mean there's no hope? And he goes, well, there's no hope unless. And his thing was that unless we give unbiased education to our children within the school system, that we stop writing history books where we're the heroes or where we're the victims, that we write them with both sides of the story so that we give the whole story and that it's evenly balanced. And I suppose that really stuck with me when I think about mediation, because that is where our hope is. We have grown up in societies where mediation wasn't the first port of call. So for us to think in terms of mediation, there has to be a shift in our mindset. There has to be a transformation in the way we think. But if we go into the school system, our children's brains are like sponges. And if we go into the school system and from the very early age, we teach them about conflict. Like really conflict to me, when I learned about conflict and understanding conflict, I remember saying to one of my lecturers, it feels like a different language. And that's what it is. It is a different language. And sometimes we have to just be, I suppose, that dictionary that goes in and explains what that other language is. And we can learn other languages, like we can learn a different way to be in conflict. And so by going into the school system, by having it as part of our curriculum, by working with young people, that when they get to our stage, that when they are in the court system, or they are in the legal system, or they are in the workplaces, or they are in their family systems, or they are in our communities in general. I mean, I know Ken at the start, at the opening conversation, he talked about conflict being internal, relationally, and being environmental. And really, and he said that has to be, you know, conflict has to be sorted in all three areas for conflict to be addressed. But if we bring that from the system, from the root, from our next generation, well, that would just be the way of thinking. You know, now I know it sounds very optimistic and maybe naive in my way of thinking, but I do believe that we don't believe it, and don't try and implement it, that'll never happen. So I'm one of the believers in it. And so I'm working at the moment to try and get funding for a schools program where culture is an issue. And to try and use mediation and to use conflict intervention to build a connection between the different communities within the school. So again, how else is mediation being used in our communities? Well, we looked at the Family Mediation Service, but there's also the Community Law Mediation Service here in Ireland, which is a free service, and it's available in North Dublin, Wicklow and Limerick. Now, most of the mediators, bar the kind of, I suppose, the core group that work there, most of the mediators work on a voluntary basis. Interestingly enough, the pandemic has been good for mediation in that while we lost our face-to-face connection with clients, when the court system closed down here, mediation was offered online. So when the courts had closed down, mediation was able to step in. So it allowed for kind of people to be, I suppose, to take that next step and not wait for the court system to open up or to try and move forward. Now, there is some disadvantages to it, while there is advantages in that, you know, connectivity can be a problem. I mean, I'm based in Meath, which is just outside Dublin, so I have great Wi-Fi, but somebody else in the rural part of Ireland mightn't have the greatest connectivity. And so if you're in the middle of mediation and you keep losing your line, it's not going to work. The connection, the relationship connection is not going to happen. And the other thing about it is that some people mightn't be IT savvy. They might be terrified of Zoom, or they mightn't feel that Zoom is a safe space. You know, they might be worried about what goes out online, where it's stored, and that sort of thing. So they might prefer. And then if you're in a household setting, if you go out to have a mediation, you're in a mediation room. Where if you're in a household setting, somebody could be in the kitchen cooking the dinner. Somebody could be coming in to talk to you, or you could be in an office environment if it's a workplace mediation. And, you know, the person that, you know, you want to, if you're having your one-to-one mediation session, might walk in. So there's all that kind of space and safety issue. So that kind of brings me to the end with a but, Vikram, if I have 5 minutes to spare.
Yeah, only issue, I'll tell you, Andrea, the only issue is that these videos sometimes create a copyright issue on your session. Your YouTube might say that
then we won't.
Yeah,
well, then we won't show it.
Yeah,
we won't show Vikram. I didn't realize that, so my apologies about that.
Because that does happen.
But what I will say for anybody who does listen back on this and who might like to look at this video is actually about 20 years on, say, from the mediated agreement as part of the Good Friday Agreement that we spoke about, and the difference it has made in lives. So if we're talking about mediation and culture and traditions, this can show you how mediation can change a culture for the better or change traditions for the better. And so that's the reason I included the video there. So I kind of thought it's just a finishing touch on how mediation can change our culture and change our traditions for the better without losing our value or belief systems, but actually use it as an integration tool and a tool that will bring connection among, people that we're living with, our communities, our workplaces, our legal system, and in the commercial field. I don't know enough about commercial mediation to kind of go into it. But I mean, it is that connection. Even when we're talking business, we need connection. And it's that connection that makes the agreements happen and help people move on and, walk away with maybe a win-win situation as opposed to a win-lose situation. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you for your time and thanks for having me, Vikram. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope I didn't go on too much because I am a chatterbox. But if anybody wants any further information, as I said, I've included loads of links there for anybody that would like them. But if anybody wants any other information, they can contact me either on my email address, or if they want to contact me through you, Vikram, that's no bother whatsoever.
Yeah. In any case, everyone's LinkedIn profile and Facebook profile is on my website, so they can definitely go there and see it also and click from there. So thank you very much, Andrea. First of all, I love your passion, the way you go about it, and just it's a pleasure listening to you. So it was really nice. And
thank you, Vikram.
Definitely there are lots of things to discuss. But Patrick is here, so we can't take more than 2 minutes. His time starts at 2. Whatever, we can ask him for an extension if he gives us an extension, but we'll ask him after 2 minutes. So
no, that's okay, Vikram.
No, but I have to ask you things. There are things that I want to ask. But Patrick, how are you on time? Patrick,
hi, good
morning.
Morning.
How are you on time?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah. So
fine. No worries.
Okay. So we'll just take another. She's just finished. You take another maybe 5 minutes to just wrap up. Yep. And your signal is a little weak. The signal is a little weak, so you'll have to just work that out. Yeah. So, Andrea, because I'll tell you why I was wanting to discuss this with you, because you started with this church aspect of it. And I felt that is a very, very, I feel a very important part of things which need to be according to me, explored a little more. And I don't know whether you saw David Shimoni's presentation. Did you see
No,
that?
I didn't, but I will look at it.
Because he's come out with a very interesting thing. He's done his research on some Jews who came from Balkans into Israel, and he studied their situation. And what he discussed from there is the rabbi is a very important person in dispute resolution. But like you said, now the point is, are you really deciding for the parties? What is the situation? How are you doing this? And are they socially bound to do it? I mean, are the parties really deciding themselves? So that issue comes up in this traditional form. So he is talking about this hybrid model. So you have these traditional dispute resolvers and have on the other side what we call the modern dispute resolution, the modern mediators. Merge them together. So the issues that come up in that traditional dispute resolution process, things like, which we also spoke to Virash about. Virash is from South Africa, who spoke about that. And in the traditional system, a woman might not get a voice. So the modern mediator can get that going. So the respect that the traditional dispute resolver has, let's keep that. That respect is a good thing. But at the same time, the negatives of it can be in some way looked at by the modern mediator. So I felt that balance. I think we should be looking at this, talking about it and seeing how it can work and how do people react to this. I felt it was a good kind of link between the two. So we don't break that link. It's not that we have to move away from it only because the person was deciding. So what do you think about that?
I think we're all learning, Vikram, and I think each of us have to learn from each other's experience. So be it that somebody was, had the role of a mediator, even if that wasn't the official title, they have a wealth of experience that they can share. And I think as we develop and we learn, we also have things that we can teach them. So I think we're all students. We're all learning from each other. And I think the day we stop being students is the day we kind of give up. Like, I think we've so much to teach each other, and we need to bring that knowledge from the past. And while we mightn't agree with some of their reasonings behind what they did, and while we mightn't agree with their foundations that are behind them, they still have an experience, a wealth of experience that maybe they can share with us. I mean, here in this country, the church has got a lot of bad press over like recent years, and a lot of people have moved away from the church because of, child abuse scandals. We had, I don't know whether you've heard of, the mother and baby homes, where in the 1950s, if a woman got pregnant outside of wedlock, she was shunned from her community and her family. But it was the priest that came in to mediate that dispute. So the priest would come into the family, but what he would do is he would organize to have the girl or the daughter shipped off to what was called mother and baby homes. And she was sent there to have her baby, and she stayed there until she had her baby, and then the baby was given up for adoption. And so this is all like, we're talking about the 1950s, but the hurt of that is still coming up. Now, on the other hand, so that's the negative impact it is. So there's a lack of trust there for the clergy in that regard, as regards kind of advising people or telling people what to do. But then on the other hand, when families emigrated to America, and maybe some people couldn't read or couldn't write. I mean, we're going back maybe in the early 20th century, and couldn't read or write. They went to the priest in the community they went to, and he would send the letters home. He would write the letters and send them home, or he would get the messages across. And I mean, right up to the 1950s and everything else. So there is a lack of trust there as regards some of the clergy, but they still have gained a wealth of experience in mediating. Like when I talked about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, like there are, a number of clergymen there that received awards for their peacekeeping efforts and what they did. These are brilliant men with brilliant minds with a wealth of knowledge to share to us. And so, so like, why lose that knowledge? Share it. And then if we combine the knowledge that we've gained and with our, I suppose, maybe broadened mind and increased education and everything else, that we can bring something to the table as well. And, you know, find out what the best is. So I think it is just keep learning from each other, regardless of whether it's a mediator or it's, you know, or somebody that was involved in some sort of dispute resolution, regardless of what their title was. And if you are what we call the modern mediator now, of course we have to learn from these people. They're the ones with the on-ground knowledge, you know. So yeah, so look, any opportunity to learn for me is a good opportunity.
And it's not just learning, actually using it. I mean, actually doing that whole thing as a hybrid model, that they're co-mediating. Because like you've already said, the northern, the co-mediation aspect of it, to bring them together in a mediation. So this, look, in a way, in the Northern Ireland situation, you have already done that. I mean, these people have come in, they've have their role to play. Everyone has a role to play. So why not work together?
Oh yeah, no, that's brilliant. And as well, another place that can be used, Vikram, is if you're mediating through, I don't know, if you're to talk about even like a school or a work system where there's different cultures and there might be conflict because of different cultures and values, that to actually, as part of the mediation, bring a mediator from that represents each of the cultures, you know, so that they can understand the culture. I think that's very important when you go into any mediation, that you understand the, you know, the values or you don't have to know their belief systems, but you need to be able to respect their culture if it's different to yours.
So that is,
and you need to understand their culture to a certain extent. So maybe you do need to co-mediate in that case.
Exactly. I think co-mediation needs to be developed, because in conversation with a beautiful mind, that show of mine, I have had two people, and byline is two minds are better than one. I use that byline there. But look, there is a lot that I would want to ask, but now it's all thing is that we are in Patrick's hand now. So Patrick is the one who has to decide whether we go any forward even a minute.
No, Patrick, I'm happy to hand the baton over to you.
Because actually, why I was wanting the certain things to be spoken about, but a lot depend on Patrick. Patrick, what do you say? You want to at any point?
I'm whatever you all want to do.
No, I'm just saying it's interesting, and you can also jump into the conversation. I'm just, because there's certain things that she picked up. I just want to take her through that. It's totally on you. This is your time that we're eating into, and we want your full 1 hour at least. So don't tell us that you have to leave.
Yeah, no, Vikram, I think allow Patrick have his 1 hour. When we meet up on the 27th.
No, this is important. Why is it important? This session is because you've spoken about certain things which I feel need a little discussion. One is the factual position is. One is how do we see it panning out, and that we need to discuss that also, because I mean, when you came up with this church thing, I'm saying how can we use it? So one is we can just say that there was a church thing, but now with this hybrid model and this co-mediation that David has spoken about, so these are things we need to discuss in the session itself. So that people can take from there, because people who would look at your session would look at that. I won't get into the other, look, the Mediation Act part of it and the concept of the council. Has it worked anywhere else in the world? How does it work? Will it work? All those things we won't get into, because that is something which is still to come up for you. So that is definitely something which comes up. But when you talk about the pendency in courts, because this is a relative thing, what kind of pendency is there in courts?
Sorry, could you say that, Vikram, again?
You said pendency in courts is there. Obviously, there's pendency, but that's a relative kind of thing. What time period is taken in settling a matter in court and all that? Do you have any, just a brief idea on that?
No, I don't, because I'm not actually within the court system myself, Vikram. I do know that because of the pandemic, the court system closed down. And so there's a huge backlog. I mean, people can be waiting up to a year for a court date. So, and I mean, that's just off the top of my head. That's not from any research paper.
Not an issue. That now, the other interesting thing is, how many mediators are there in your village?
In my village, there is, let me see, 1, 2 that I know of. Myself and one other person.
I'll tell you what I'm really interested in doing, which I've been trying to, I don't know, ask people also, how many mediators do we need in a certain number of population? So in 7,000 that you have in your village, how many mediators do you need? What do you think?
And you see, funny, Vikram, you should ask that question, because I don't think And it is the nature of Ireland and the small villages. They actually wouldn't use somebody local to mediate. They'd go to somebody outside. So when I mediate, I generally mediate for, say, couples that are outside of my community. I don't mediate when inside my community, because they don't want that, because you're going to meet these people walking down to the local shop for your pint of milk and your sliced pan of bread, so they don't want to be discussing their conflicts in front of you. So it's generally people outside of my community that I would mediate.
But what do you think in terms of 7,000 people, how many mediators does a village need?
Well, it depends on the conflict, Vikram. So is it an entrenched conflict? Is it everyday conflicts? Is it, I think every household needs a mediator. If that answers your question. I think every household should have a mediator. And it's usually, I suppose, it falls on the role of the mother a lot of the times. But and then maybe that's probably a bit of a stereotypical comment to make. But I think every household should have, somebody in the family who acts as the mediator.
Well, why I keep talking about this figure is because the scale of the number of mediators that we need in this world or in each country is so huge. And on the other end, this whole concept of the training and certifications that is spoken about, it doesn't work in a lot of places because mediation is not anywhere in certain places. So we have, like in India, we have this 1.3 billion population. To be able to get those mediators down to the grassroots, to be available through this formal system that has come up in a lot of countries, is that at all possible? So I just try to give, because I feel that for every 1,000 population, you need a mediator. We have to.
No, I would agree with you. But I do think the issue, say, in Ireland is that there are plenty of mediators, but they're not being utilised.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem, because people will go to the government-funded mediation services, but for the private mediators, they're kind of, and then of course you've the legal kind of the legal end of it coming in now. So it's kind of getting a little bit more complicated, but also it needs to be advertised more in that mediation services are available. But people are, I don't know whether they're afraid of mediation or whether they think mediation means they've conflict, and that some way marks that, kind of puts a bad mark on who they are as people. But I think we can package mediation in different terminology, if that's what makes it easier for people to come. So I'm not stuck on the terminology of mediation.
Which is what I put in that theme. Yeah. So that's what I put in the theme. I said, whatever name, they don't know the word mediation, but whatever process, they know the process.
Yeah.
Because look, I'm really conscious about this aspect that Patrick is waiting. So I really actually don't want him to.
Okay. I'm good to go.
But because there was just a point on the free part of it in the community mediation, which obviously is an issue everywhere. When it's free, no one is going to value it. On the peer mediation part of it, I just feel that on one end, this whole concept of conflict management training, which people are trying to do under peer mediation, is moving away from the basic concept that peer mediation, let it stick to mediation. Let these children learn that they have to resolve their disputes within themselves, identify their own mediator within themselves, do it themselves, which they're already doing. So I'm trying to focus on that, because it has become a much larger concept under peer mediation. That mediation aspect has got lost. So I think we need to look at that. And I think we can, obviously, like I said, we'll have the conversation. When we have the conversation, we'll take it further. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Andrea. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yep. Patrick, the best of luck.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Thank you. You too. Bye.